Hey everyone, and welcome back to Magic Towers Resort. So as I said in the last episode that we did on the jungle area, we will be starting with a flat ride, and that's what I'm building right here. It's not the flattest of rides because it is a little drop tower, or maybe more like a froggy tower that goes up and down. And I figured this would fit pretty well within the area because it has some verticality like the rest of the area as well. And I can kind of theme it like a tree. So as I said in the comments to someone else, Tripstrail in Germany has a tower like this that is themed as a tree as well. And I kind of like that idea. Of course, the one in Tripstrail isn't as well themed, I guess you could say. They tried, but it is a pretty old ride, or at least it seems to be a pretty old ride, which is why it doesn't look very good. Anyway, so that's not what we're going for in this park. So instead, I'm building it a bit more grandiose, if you will. Though with the flat ride being there, I do have some challenges though as to how I'm gonna hide the backstage. Of course, we can plant some trees there, but I don't think we can quite get to the height of the tower. So when you are on the tower and you are on the right side, you might be able to just look a little bit inside of the backstage area. I think that's okay though. Even Disney does that every now and then. We're on the right. You might be able to see a bit more than you usually should be able to. And I think that's okay. While you're riding these kind of things, you're not really focusing on looking around you anyways. It's more about the fun you have on the ride itself. So I think that works out pretty well. Next up though, I wanted some kind of restaurant in this area because we didn't have that yet. We only have a few food stands in the building on the other side. So I figured a good sit-down restaurant would be very fitting for this area as well. Just to give the people a place to sit down and enjoy their meal. While probably having waiters bring their meals as well. Just a bit more expensive, a bit more fancy basically. But of course, since this area is so organic, I couldn't just build a square building. So instead, I am basically trying to use every trick in the book to get this building to look round. And you can obviously do that using track. So here I'm using the monorail track for the base at the bottom. And then putting a wooden track on top of it just to make it a little bit... to make it kind of appear as if it has a wooden platform that you would be walking on it. Maybe the seating outside is on the side of this wooden deck as well. So I'm building some paths on the inside so we could place some shops there later as well. Just to make it functional. Right now this restaurant is pretty terrible in terms of usability because peeps might get stuck inside of this building as there is only one way in and out of the building. I may have to fix that later, but just making a little pass-through on the other side, basically. But we'll see how it goes once we add some peeps in. As you might notice, though, I did open up the park in one of the previous episodes, but my guest count is getting lower and lower as we go on. At the end of recording this episode, I actually found why that is happening, because I actually switched some things around with the entrance and it basically made the entrance non-functional anymore. It was no longer working and people wouldn't be able to get into the park anymore. So I fixed that for the next episode. So in the next episodes we should be able to see between 100 and 500 guests inside of the park, just to kind of make the park a bit more alive. Though I must add, I've tried to fast forward a little bit and all the peeps get very sad really quickly. Because obviously they can't find the exit of the park. So that's a bit unfortunate. Hopefully we will be able to fix that in the future at least a little bit by making some paths underground that just connect some areas that peeps may not be able to traverse between. But I'm not sure if that's something that we can completely fix until OpenRC2 gets a better guest AI. So for now I think we'll just have to do with that. I think the restaurant is just about finished here. I added a blue roof to keep with the theme. Something that I am kind of thinking of is maybe adding a second roof color just to kind of bring some variation in there. But for now, to make it a bit more interesting, the roof, I figured I could add a tower, and I'm using this trick here again, where I'm using the River Rapids trick just to give the wall a little bit more depth, because as I said in the previous episodes, we don't have a lot of choice when it comes to creating round walls. So using these round wall pieces and the River Rapids trick is about what we have to do with. We don't have much more. Just really quickly cleaning up the flat right there, just make it a bit more realistic. Add a little gate, add some canopies for the guests that are queuing there, just to make sure that they don't get too hot while waiting outside in the sun. But apart from that, I think the flat right is about finished now. So now that we're moving on, as I also said in one of the previous episodes, is that we would be building a dark ride in this area. Most likely like a boat ride type of thing. So my initial idea was that the dark ride might be able to be placed in the facade that we have right now. When you enter the area on the right, you have the large facade. We will be able to hide a show building in there. But I figured out for a boat ride we need a larger show building, and to make sure that peeps don't have to completely walk around the show building, which is very inconvenient, and also kind of inconvenient in terms of hiding the show building, because building these facades is pretty expensive, and if we have to do that on all sides, I'm not sure if that would be very feasible. So I came up with the idea of actually building the largest show building on the other side of the path, and you'll see in a second how I came up with solving that while still using the smaller show building as well. But first though, I built a tree here. Spoiler alert, I am gonna remove it because I found out that when you rotate the camera, it was actually blocking the view of the restaurant. And I didn't really like that because I put a lot of time in the restaurant, and then you suddenly couldn't see it anymore because this giant tree is in the way. So maybe we'll build a replacement for that tree later, but for now don't get too attached to it because it is gonna get removed. Here I came up with the idea of kind of expanding the area into the hub area, just to kind of show just a little bit better what this area is about, and I think it helps. It looks a little bit better. I might do that with the other areas as well, at least from now on, because we're now kind of outside of the area where people will be looking at the nighttime spectacular that I would imagine to be at this park, of course, with the magic towers as the centerpiece. Though here to add some overgrownness, I am kind of adding some bushes to the roof again. Just kind of dress things up. And this is where I can start seeing my idea for how to actually hide the show building. So my idea was that I could choose the smaller show building for just the station and some maintenance areas, and use a second show building on the other side of the path, which will be facing the outside of the park, which would house the main ride. What this would allow me to do is to basically only have to worry about dressing up one side of the show building, which I think will be more realistic than having to dress up every single side. And it would also give us some the ability to place some utilities around the show building as well, which we would probably need in case of a water ride, because I believe these kind of ride systems require some water management systems as well, with things like a backup water basin and things like that. So I came up with this layout that we have right now. I'm not going to change it a whole lot anymore. I was quite happy with the layout. So one thing that I do have to say though, this dark ride does not have a lot of story behind it. When it comes to dark rides, the story part is not really my type of deal. But I did come up with a little bit of a fake story for this ride, though not a very, not really a proper one like you would of course see at larger parks. The thing with dark rides is they are very complicated and they require a lot of disciplines to come together and work together on these rides just to make them. So you usually have a lot of creative people. You have people who are really good at writing stories. You have a lot of people who are really good at drawing and putting things together. You have people who are very good at the technical aspects and making sure that it will be realistically feasible financially as well. And a dark ride is usually the result of all these aspects coming together and working on it. I think even more so than with a flat ride or with a roller coaster. So that's also why I personally like to focus on one area when building a dark ride, because I'm just a single person and not a whole team of professionals. So this is about the best that I can do. So that's why I started with the layout, even though I didn't really have a clue yet what the scenes were going to be. Usually that would kind of come together. So you would build the ride scene by scene, try to see how the track would fit through that, and basically iterate upon that just to make sure that it eventually fits inside of the space that you have in mind and within the budget that you have in mind as well, or at least that the financial people have in mind. Anyways, though, here I'm building the station and also a little maintenance area. So what I want to do here is have the exit station and the boarding station separated like they are on Pirates of the Caribbean in the Magic Kingdom. And what they do very very cleverly is that you after you get out, you can actually see the boat going through a little dark hole, basically, and after that it actually goes up a lift hill, and then when it reaches the top again, that's actually where the boarding station is. What this allows the park to do is actually surprise the guest with the drop, because you haven't actually gone up yet, but you are going down. But later on you don't have to then have the anticlimax of having to go up before going into the station again. So I think that's a really clever trick. I'm not using that specific trick here, but I did figure that it would be a good way to keep the station in itself kind of compact by having the turnaround happen inside of the maintenance area, which would then also allow the people working here to more easily take one of the boats out of rotation and work on it if they need to. So that was kind of my thought process behind it. So that's kind of why we're combining this single show building for these two reasons. The door there to get the boats outside of the building doesn't have very good access to the outside of the park yet. But that is something that I will have to think about when it gets there, because if you were to take a car there, a boat, I mean, out of the rotation, have to take it somewhere else for maintenance, then you do need a way to get out of the park with that boat, preferably as quickly as possible without having to traversing the entire park. Though on the other hand, that might be something that will be reserved for nighttime operations anyways, when the guests aren't in the park. So here I'm kind of dressing up the queue a little bit, adding some supports for the rock work that is found inside of the queue, just to kind of give it this stage show type of appearance that you would sometimes see in the backstage areas. So that's kind of what I'm trying to replicate here. I also decided to make the roof a little bit lower because, well, it's just a station and a maintenance area, so we don't need a lot of height for our scenes yet. That's something that we can then use in our larger show building, was my thought there. So I'm adding the black borders there on the inside just to kind of show where the roof would begin. It's just one of the ways that I like to do my dark rides is just by opening up the roofs to kind of let you peek inside of it like a little dollhouse. I think it works pretty well. Some other techniques for letting people see inside of rides would be using the cutaway view, which would allow you to set the height which you will be able to see through the roof and things like that. But I'm personally not too big of a fan of this yet, because if you have a building with roofs at several heights, which does happen a lot, especially if you have a ride that goes down a hill or something, you don't need the entire building to be as high as the highest point of the ride. That would just be a waste. So that kind of makes it harder to work with the cutaway view. Additionally, with the dollhouse, you have a bit more control over what the viewer can actually see, because even though Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 can get pretty detailed, you can't really get into the nitty-gritty details of a dark ride. So you have to sometimes kind of work with the perspective to make things work and to kind of make things appear like they are more well-dressed than they actually are. So for the entrance of this ride, I wanted to kind of make a building that stands out, which was kind of hard because the other buildings are already pretty large. And I didn't want it to go much larger. Actually, this building is even smaller than most of the others are. But what I'm doing instead is kind of tapering it and giving it a bit more detail and a bit more colors. Just to really show that this building is a bit more important than the rest and that you might want to check it out. Of course, the sign on the front of the building kind of gives it away as well. So hopefully this building would stand out enough from the other buildings to actually tell the people that are walking past here that this building is a bit more important and that this would actually be the entrance to the ride. I think that would be pretty obvious. Especially since in this alleyway that we have now created between the two show buildings, we actually have some path interactions with the ride. And I quite like that. I'm always a fan of trying to create these interactions where the guests have a good view of the ride or, it just goes over under the paths. I always quite like that. So I could imagine this alleyway here between the two show buildings to be a pretty good photo location where you might be able to spot multiple ride vehicles in a single photo, for instance. So I think that would be pretty cool. And it also allows us to bring the boats to the other show building. And instead of actually having to hide that, we can actually just show them and make them part of the environment, which I think is a pretty smart way of dealing with that issue. So the bridge over the ride here does have stairs. If I were to create this in real life, I would probably not want any stairs there. You would want it to be wheelchair accessible because there's no other way to get to the other side otherwise without having to take a giant detour. But in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, this was the best I could do because if I were to just make it flat, it would be too low. But it only needs to be a little bit higher than that to actually make it a safe clearance with the boats that are passing under it. But for now, though, for Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, the stairs will have to do, I guess. So that brings us to the next thing, though, because this next show building also needs some dressing up, or at least it does for this side of the building. Since we already have about 3 buildings that are visible on the other side, I wanted the other side to be, or at least the side that is facing the outside, to be a bit more organic and have a bit less prominent man-made structures in there. Just to really make sure that the attention is on the other side, because that will be the most well-teamed side of the building. The other side instead kind of relies on some trees and vegetations, and also fake trees and vegetation as well, just to fill it up really and hide the show building that's behind it. So my idea for the dark ride, or at least kind of the story that I was going for, is that this dark ride is gonna take you on a tour to show you what life is like for the inhabitants of this area. All right, so they are living in a jungle and they decided to set a base here, and they are living like they are. So I would imagine the top part before the drop to kind of just show some of the interiors of these buildings and how these people are living inside of there. And after that, right before the drop, you start seeing some of the threats that these inhabitants have to deal with, which then takes you down the waterfall basically. And that's where you kind of get into the dark side of the jungle, where you really start to see some of the things that the inhabitants have to protect themselves from. After that, they go through some caves and end up in the safe part of the forest again, and everything is happy, la la la. Basically, like, not the final scene, but the scene before the final scene would kind of be like the Avatar River Journey ride. I always forget the name. I had the name right before I started recording. Anyways, though. And after that, you get into the village again. You start seeing these buildings again that the people have made. And then the ride ends. That's kind of the overall story that I kind of developed for this ride. And that I kind of came up with while building it as well. So first I'm putting in a floor just to kind of give myself an idea of where this upper part of the ride would need to be supported and where the scenes will need to be lower, because those bits would be a good places for some scene dividers, just to kind of give myself an idea of how much space I have. Because obviously, while it is passing under the upper level of the ride, there's not a lot of height clearance, so you can't do a lot of teaming. So I made sure, not also for that reason, but also because you have to support it properly as well. I made sure to only pass under the upper part twice for a very short amount. So we could really easily just hide that as a little cave, basically. If we were to build this in real life, because we don't have to get into this detail in Rollercoaster Tycoon. But we would be able to hide that as a cave that you really quickly go through. And after that, you get to the next scene again. So that hides pretty well. I did have one issue, though, with this layout of this dark ride, which I couldn't really do anything with. So I have this dead space basically in the center of the dark ride, which preferably I wouldn't have, because it's just a waste of money and space basically. And preferably you'd be able to use every single space that you have available, but I just really couldn't have I didn't know how to fill that up with a scene, because even though there is a boat passing past there, it wouldn't really make sense to have a scene just for the drop, because you will be passing by it very quickly. So to have such a large space didn't really make sense. So instead, I figured it would be some kind of area where some of the water stuff is being managed, and maybe some of the show control would sit inside of that little area as well. Though admittedly that area does seem a bit large for it to house all of that. But let's just go with it. This is about the best I was able to do for this specific ride. So let's get on though. We are now starting to team the last two scenes. As I said, it would be a little bit like the Avatar boat ride, where it is very, very magical. The plants are shining brightly, basically, and then moving in various alien-like ways, just kind of show how beautiful the area is. And here I discovered a cool kind of way to make some fake trees. So I'm using the pillars here, or at least the pipes, basically, just to kind of make it look like there are trees there. And I think I quite like this, because it looks a bit more fake than other trees that we have, which I think is perfect for creating a scene like this, where obviously these trees would actually be fake, because you probably wouldn't want a real tree inside of your building, especially inside of a building that is probably supposed to last for several tens of years, basically. So yeah, it's really just kind of filling up these scenes. Like I said earlier, it's really about, kind of giving the idea that there is really something very sophisticated going on inside of these buildings. Well, in reality, mostly is you're just kind of spamming some scenery to make it look pretty. Of course, if I were to build this dark ride inside of Flint Coaster, you would go about it a bit more carefully. Because then you actually can get really close to it and really see the detail. So then you actually have to care a bit more about that as well. But for this type of ride inside of Rollercoaster Tycoon, it really works. You just kind of go in there and to kind of fill it up, to kind of hide the sight lines that would show the edge of the building or some of the other parts that the guest shouldn't be able to see. And as you can see, I kind of leave some of the walls open as well, just to really give a better look at the building. Usually I kind of come up with the shape of my building, kind of start building from there. And as I'm building the scenes, I can already kind of tell what areas I would want to keep visible and what areas I want to hide. So I kind of just go in there and place some rows where there's really nothing interesting to see and kind of keep it open where there is a lot to see, just to make sure that I'm focusing on the right aspects of the ride. With the main focus, of course, being on the actual ride vehicles that are going through it, because I think it's really important in these dark rides that you can kind of really see the path that the dark ride is taking, because then if you're looking at it, you can kind of follow along and kind of imagine what the guest would be able to see inside of this dark ride. So I'm kind of putting the drop here in a little dark box, kind of inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, which also does that. When you're going down, you're just really close to some very dark walls, basically. And after that, when you get to the bottom, then it actually opens up and then you're in the very large building. I wasn't too sure what to put there at the end, but it needed to be something big, something scary. So this wouldn't be my first choice, but I think it works. It's just a skeleton head with a little tent on top, which kind of looks like a hat. It just gives a very large, imposing figure to put there at the end of the drop, which you're heading towards. Just make it a little bit more scary. Of course, our options for such figures are very limited in Rollercoaster Tycoon too. But I think it's always nice to kind of play around and try some different things and see what is actually possible, like I was doing right there. So we have the building almost done here, and almost the entire dark ride done, really. It's really just about adding some finishing touches, just to make sure that all the black walls are in the right places, just to kind of hide the corrugated steel walls of the building, basically. Just make sure that these parts aren't visible, and also making sure again to that the sightlines for the people looking at this ride are correct as well, like the dollhouse effect that I was talking about. Though this is about it for what we do in this episode. We are gonna add some utilities to this dark ride as well, and of course hiding it a bit with some vegetation. So in general, this area is pretty close to being done now. I do have a few things that I do need to work on that I haven't really gotten to yet. So we have the area between the jungle area and the Arabian area, which still needs steaming. My idea right now for that was to eventually place like a little Arabian market type of thing and maybe put some flat rides in there as well, just to fill that up. It would also allow us to put some extra shops in there that are easily accessible to the peeps. Just make sure that from the simulation standpoint of Rollercoaster Tycoon, it will actually still work. And in the corner of this dark ride, when you go from the jungle area to the Arabian area on the right side, we have a little area as well that's kind of left over, and I might actually put some toilets there. Just because it feels like the right type of place to put some toilets. It's in a very accessible area, and I don't really have a lot to put there anyways. I could put another dark ride there, I suppose, but I don't want to put too many rides in every area, because that would allow us to still have unique rides in every single area. And if we look at parks like Disney, they don't have that many rides in their areas. If you really look at it, usually it's like 3 or 4 rides per area, so I think that would work well for this as well. Though right now we're at 2 per area, so I guess we could add a bit more. For instance, in the Arabian area we have the roller coaster and the Magic Carpet ride, and in the jungle area we now have the massive e-ticket dark ride and the little drop tower. So I suppose a flat ride could actually work for it. I'm adding some pathways, some backstage areas for the maintenance area of the boat ride. We'll later connect that to the rest. And that's already it for this episode. So thank you guys so much for watching again. If you like this video, please make sure to like the video. It really helps me out. So far it seems that between 1 and 5 to 1 on 10 people are actually liking these videos, which is really awesome. In addition to that, I'm almost reaching 1,000 subscribers, which is a really insane milestone. And I think with this video, we will be able to reach that. Anyways though, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!